This is something you make news. This has, America is not the world police. This has to be done by global force if you're going to deal with terrorism in Iraq, Syria, Ukraine. It has to be a global force. It has to be a global United Nations force that deals with these terrorists. It has to be a global force. Somehow you have to put a world global force together of about 750,000 troops, enough to fight the war. Fight the war. We cannot fight the wars by ourselves. We are not the police of the world. We are not the police of the world. We just can't do it no more. We've been doing it for so long, people just call and we go. But you can't do it no more. Iraq's stuck. Once the United Nations pushes to get involved or answer, it's never going to get anywhere. Syria, people are dying of innocence. Ukraine, people are dying of innocence. And Iraq, people are dying of innocence. We cannot fight global wars. We cannot fight all the wars of the world. We cannot be the police of the world. There's much that is needed here in America for the American people. There's much that is needed to help the American people. We cannot do it all ourselves. That's the truth of human life. We cannot do it all ourselves. The rest of the world has to take their share of the responsibility. Otherwise, it doesn't go nowhere. We all have to be part of the answer. All nations. All nations have to be part of the answer. It has to be a United Nations global force. And until that happens, it's never going to end. Until you can put a global force there in Iraq and in Iraq, especially Iraq and Syria, such war-torn nations where there's no water, there's no food, there's no care, there's just dictators, Al Qaeda, ISIS, ILS, ISIL, Abu Dhabi, and all these other terrorists in the world. It's never going to end. It's never going to end. They're never going to know a moment's peace until you put a global force in there. It really has to be a global force through the United Nations. And that's the only way it's going to stop. Otherwise, they're going to continue for years. This war will be going on. People will be fighting for power, for oil, for care, for cash. And the innocents will suffer and die. That's all that's going to happen. And anybody that denies terrorism has just got to screw us. Anybody that doesn't believe in terrorism has to screw us. Because it's a fact of human life. It's the reality of human life. That the only way you can fight this is by global force. It's by global force. You cannot fight. We cannot fight all the wars. We cannot fight all the terrorists. We cannot fight all the world by ourselves. Just can't do it no more. There's no money. That's the human truth. That's the human fact. That's the human news. America is not the world police. We cannot save everybody. But this has to be done globally. Globally. By the United Nations. By people. If you don't do it if you don't do it that way, the world just falls apart. These people are going to suffer and die, suffer and die, suffer and die. More children are starving to death every day. There's 17 million hungry children in this country. What do we do about that? That's what I mean. It's just a massive mess in Iraq, Afghanistan. And who do we have to thank for that? Mr. George Bush, the war criminal, the one who fought to unseat Saddam Hussein, who kept peace in Iraq, even though he slaughtered hundreds of thousands. That's what I mean. This isn't going to stop till you get one nasty dictator in there who'll kill everything that moves. And ISIS seems to be the head of it. They seem to be the head of the snake. It's a three-headed snake. It is. Got Al Qaeda, Taliban, and ISIS. And it's just terrorists. They're just all killing each other. Anybody that had any education left the country because they don't want to get caught in the middle of a war, in the middle of a slaughter zone. Short on doctors, they're short on medicine, they're short on care, they're short on food, short on water, they're short on health, they're short on living. It's the fight of human life. It's the fight of human life that has to become the fight of all human life. All human governments. All governments have to be part of it. If all governments aren't part of it, you're never going to end it. You're never going to stop. You're going to have to put troops in there for a generation, for a whole generation, outlive the tyranny that's going on in these two nations now. Until people realize that the value of life is what you live in and not what you kill in it. In these nations, it's never going to stop. It's just going to, like it's done for years, it's going to go from generation to generation. Like Palestine. Palestine wants to be a site, wants to be a state, wants to be a country, but yet they want to support terrorism and terror acts. Can't do it. Can't do it. Palestine should be a country, but you can't do it with people living on terror. People feeding on terror. Terrorism is real. Terrorism is a fact. That's the human reality of it. That's the human reality of it. It's we cannot, as the American people, which is made up of every race in the world, be the global police force. We cannot be the world's police force. Everybody has to unite. Where the hell is the United Nations? Where the hell is the United Nations with all that's going on? What are they doing about Syria? Where are UN troops? Let's get some UN troops in there. It's not just the US. We have to take a lead, but we can't lead if they don't follow. We can't lead if everybody don't help. When you fight a war in Iraq like that they're going on now, to stop that kind of insurgents, you need hundreds of thousands of troops. Not 10,000 or 20,000 or 100,000, hundreds of thousands. You need to put armament in there where you can keep the peace constantly 24/7, 365. And that's the only way they'll stop it. That's the only way you'll stop it. Unless these people fight for their freedom. And I hope they do fight for their freedom. Because they deserve rights and freedoms. As does every human being. Every human being deserves rights and freedoms. But you cannot fight a war where terrorists live without global force. You got a global force. Number one, you stop arming. You stop selling weapons. You stop training the country by selling these people weapons, armaments, and everything else that the Iraqis dropped and ran away from. But you cannot fight this war without at least 750,000 troops. UN troops. UN troops. You need a united force. You need a united force in the world. Something that can stand together, that can stand in any nation and put a stop to the killing and the slaughter of innocent people. And until that is recognized and done, it's never going to stop. It has to be a global force. It has to be a global force put together. There has to be a global force put together of all nations, of all armies, of all air force, of all marines, of all navy. Everybody has to be a part. Japan, China, wherever it is. We cannot stop terrorism unless it's a global force. And that's just simply the human truth. We no longer have the resources to fight wars around the world. We cannot police every nation. We cannot stop the slaughter of innocents that's going on in Iraq. Just can't do it. How are we going to do it? Bomb them? And bomb them? Where are we going to get the money for the bombs? It's just going to get worse and worse. Unless the UN puts a global force together, like they did back in the 90s, where you've got 500,000 or 750,000 troops, and you can go into Baghdad, you can go into Syria and take these egregious little animals out of power, and stop their killing, and stop their starving, and raping, and pillaging, and chopping off their arms and limbs, and honor killings and everything else. Will it ever end? It won't ever end. It'll just keep on coming. It'll keep on coming. It's not going to stop. We cannot be the police of the world. We cannot police the world. It's just that simple. We cannot police the world. You need a global force. You need a global force to do this. This is what the UN needs to do. The UN needs to put troops together from all nations. Not just ours, but from all nations. So that everybody is part of it. To make these two countries understand that peace is the only answer. And it has to come. Even if you have to put troops on the ground, it has to be done by global force. By global force, that means the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, the Iranians, all of us, not the Iranians, but all of us, Britain, all of us, France, England, Germany, all of us in the free world have to put a global UN force together to deal with these types of situations. There should be a global force. There should be at least 1 million-man United Nations global force, period, to take on these things. And it's the only way to stop it. Otherwise, you're just going to get car bombs, pack bombs. You've got to take away their will to fight, their will to die, their will to live. You've got to take it away from them. And until you do that, you're not going to stop it. And innocent people are going to die in Iraq, and Syria, and Ukraine. until a peace force is initiated, until a peace force of global proportions is initiated in this world, in this region, it's not going to stop. You need a major peace force. You need a major peace force. This is the truth of human life. And it's not going to stop until you do it. It's not going to stop until the United Nations puts a peace force together and puts troops on the ground and air support and Navy support and naval support for both nations. It's not going to stop. It's just going to keep on coming. But we can't do every war ourselves. We cannot fight every war ourselves. Just can't do it. There's just not enough army. There's not enough men. We've got enough now. Our VA can't even support those that are crippled and shot. Where are we going to get the money from? You need a global force. You need a UN global force. And that's the truth of human life. It has to be a global force. This is the 7 billion human being news. I hope people realize this. That it has to be a global force and a global commitment to the peace and security of all nations on Earth. Not just Syria or Iraq, but all nations on Earth. And until that force comes together, until the United Nations puts that force together like they did in the early 2000s, you put them kind of troops on the ground where you can stabilize these nations and stabilize these barbs. There's nothing else you can do. We can drone bomb, but it's still, we need the money for our VA. We need the money for our veterans. They fought in this war and fought in this war and fought in this war, and no other country in the world has fought a war as long as our troops have fought this war. It's time for the UN to interfere. It's time for the UN to pass a resolution to put troops on the ground in Iraq, and Syria, and Ukraine if need be, to protect these people from these insurgents, from these terrorists, from these maniacs. And that's the only way you're going to stop it. That is the only way you're going to stop it. And that's the only way you're going to finish it. That's the only way you're going to finish it. Because they're going to have to stay there for years to come. We're going to have to keep them there for years to come. To keep that part of the world stabilized. And then you can begin to make countries. You can begin to free people. You can begin human rights. You can begin education. You can begin bringing water, food, care, and all kinds of stuff to this nation. Allow them to grow. And that's the human truth. That's the human truth. I would love to see 750,000 UN troops over there. I would love nothing better than the UN to make a human effort to put 750,000 troops over there. But you need a global commitment. And we need a global commitment to our world, to the climate world, to all this. And until it stops, it's never going to end. It's just going to keep on growing. It's going to keep on growing. It's going to keep on growing. And the Syrians are going to die. They've already lost 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 now. Millions are homeless. There's no food. There's no water. There's no care. There's probably very little medicine. What else can we do? What else can we do as the American people? Unless the world stands in back of us as the UN and fights this insurgents and all these insurgents together, you cannot hopefully stabilize that world because we just don't have enough manpower anymore. We have 57,000 troops that are sick in the VA that can't get help. It needs to be done by the UN. This needs to be done by the UN. United Nations forces. United Nations forces. This is what it needs. You need to put 750 to 1 million troops in that part of the world and stabilize that country, stabilize the countries. And then you can begin to repair damage that's been done there. Until then, you're just going to have terrorists blowing and bombing and killing innocent human lives on both countries. And maybe other countries. I don't know. But you can't stop it without a global force. That's the simple human truth. That's the simple human fact. That's the simple human life. You cannot stop it without a global force. UN has to put a global force together that is willing to protect, stay there, and serve for the interim. That's the only way that this is going to work. This is the 7 billion big news. Thank you for watching. It takes a global force. To take action, you need global force. You need global approval. global health, global care. That's the human truth. That's the human fact. That's the human life. Thank you for watching.